But our first guest and our first friend is Grover Norquist. Grover Norquist is the founder of the Americans for Tax Reform. People know him for that, know that famous tax pledge, no less an authority than Phyllis Schlafly. I remember her saying, well, I always tell you two things. She always said, I consider Grover Norquist a friend. She's been friends of yours for decades. Yeah. And she said the tax pledge that candidates can sign to say they won't raise taxes, she used to say was one of the most effective tools to get candidates to make clear what they were doing. Very simple, not complicated. So welcome, Grover Norquist. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you.
And John Schlafly, of course, is here. And so, Grover, we've been doing this. We've been talking about President Trump, and we have a book. We're just coming out with a book. I'm coming out with a book, Top 100 Trump, Promises Made, Promises Kept. And through this Eagle Countdown, we have sort of two through lines. One is, what's your favorite promise kept? And then the second thing is, what's going to happen in the next 40 days? What should people be doing, thinking about? So first of all, you have watched a lot of presidents. Americans for Tax Reform started during the Ronald Reagan administration. One of the things he wanted, actually, in terms of the issues. All these years later, what's out of this 3.5 years into the Trump administration, what's your favorite promise kept?
The favorite promise kept is the president has reduced the cost of government by reducing tax rates and also by reducing regulations, both of those. You can take part of somebody's life by taking a larger percentage of their income or by increasing the cost of every good and service they use through regulatory burden. So both of those take away people's freedom, their time, their income, their wealth, their life savings. And he brought both of those actually down, and that tremendously helped create new opportunities, more jobs, higher income.
Did you, when he was running, I remember him saying, we're going to get the jobs back and all that. I didn't really understand. I really didn't myself. When I saw him in December of, 2017, and he had the tax, and he said, look, we've got to lower corporate rates, not because we want to help corporations, but because you have to compete with the world. And that when, and in the grand scope of what he did, changing the corporate tax rate gave our American companies the chance to not be swallowed up. And at the time he gave that speech, I thought that he needed to sell that, and I think he did, but that's a huge difference maker.
Before Trump, in the United States, we had a 35% tax on all corporate earnings worldwide. So we had two things, 35% tax on what companies made, highest in the world. Right. Communist China was at 25. We took 35. Germany was at 25. We were at 35, higher than Canada, higher than every other country in the world. And as a result, if you're going to make your decision, I'm going to build a factory, where should I put it? Oh, these guys will take 25% of what I earn. The Americans will take 35. I might put this in China or Germany or Japan.
Right.
But worse than the fact that we had the one tax, if you're an American company, when you're doing business in another country like France, they have a corporate tax. They take some of your money, or an individual taxes on people. When you bring that money back, you have to pay the higher American tax after. So it meant that once an American company invested overseas or made money overseas, you didn't even have to invest overseas, you made money overseas in France, France tax it. If you bring it back to the United States, they tax it again. So maybe leave it there and build a factory.
Right.
So our tax policy was designed to say, don't invest here. And if you do have a company here, when you sell things abroad, don't take those profits back and build another factory. Build a factory overseas. Literally, that was the policy. And Obama and Biden were yelling at companies that were several thousand left the United States. So Burger King is owned by a Canadian firm now.
Right.
Now, same hamburgers, same workers, same everything. Worth more as a Canadian firm than an American firm, thanks to Biden and Obama's tax rates. President changed that.
Well, and I remember, John, we're St. Louisans, Anheuser-Busch was swallowed up by InBev, which was Brazilian guys running it, money, but they'd gone to Belgium because Belgium was the best place to put and they were coming against an American company, and they were able to make an offer per share that was higher because they could get more money by being a Belgian company.
Yes.
No one's ever made a list. Burger King's another one, AB, that of these companies we lost in that period where we didn't understand that. Maybe they did. I've not seen it.
We understood it. The Democrats didn't care.
Yeah. So, but Rand Paul, we asked Rand Paul this question. We're talking Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform, about promises kept. What's the favorite promise kept? We asked Rand Paul. I thought he might say, no more endless wars, beating up on the NSA, whatever. His answer was taxes. Mm-hmm. And he said the best promise kept. And because he said Trump wouldn't go for the taxes that the lobbyists started carving up, he said give it the broadest tax so that everybody got a tax, a middle class and all. And Rand was was arguing that Trump made a difference on that one, for that tax cut that was for more Americans than what would often happen in these fights.
Oh, absolutely. Remember, the Republicans were ready to bring it down to 25%, from 35 to 25, which would have been progress. He said, no, 15. At which point the Republicans in the House and Senate moved to 20.
Right.
Okay. And you eventually got 21.
Right.
It was going to bounce around because it was too easy a pay for other things. But by saying we negotiate not from 25, which would have headed you at 30, not even from 20, but from 15, you got to 21.
Yeah.
So it's good negotiating and very good policy.
Yeah. John, any thoughts here?
Well, I would just quickly support everything you say, Grover, by also reminding you about how the cost of energy has come down. And Trump has played a big role in that. And, America runs on energy, the economy runs on energy, and the cost of energy is so much lower now than it was a few years ago.
When our friend Obama was the president, on federal land, they dropped the amount of oil and natural gas. So it went down.
Right.
Okay. On state-owned land and private land in Pennsylvania and North Dakota and so on, it went up dramatically. So Obama tried to kill the fracking revolution on the part he was in charge of.
Right.
But the rest of the world got out from under him. And that's why you had some of the growth that you did even before Trump got in. But when Trump said, we're no longer throwing marbles at your feet, we're no longer going to try and kill you, go to work.
Yeah.
And we really did get a lot more energy. Prices came down. We could have an argument with Iran and Venezuela and take their oil off the market and not worry that would spark things. Russia is a fraction of the power it was when Trump got elected because their power all flowed from the fact that they had cash from oil and natural gas and selling weapons. But without that, their ability to buy friends and influence people and even arm themselves is way down from where it was if we were busy trying to heat ourselves with solar energy and the rest of the world
windmills.
was buying Soviet oil.
And recently I heard the description that I heard was, do you think that Bahrain and Saudi and everybody is only interested in peace because they like Trump, or are they saying to themselves, we may not have the power we did in the next 20 years if America and others are independent, oil independent, and be able to get out from under it. But Grover, one of the things you always have cared about, the taxes you've known for, but the regulatory stuff. You've always had this streak where you've got these businesses where someone says, I don't like that field, I'm going to regulate you out of existence. And you're so mention now the regulatory the agenda of this administration. I mean, because the Bushes tried. W. Bush had an anti-regulatory move, but it's pretty dramatic under Trump, no?
This really is. This is big, and it's on purpose.
Right.
George W. Bush had one. I called him and said, I'd like to write an article to help highlight it. He didn't want to talk about it because he thought it was embarrassing or it would make him look bad. Trump trumpets it. For starters, if you want to have a new regulation, you got to get rid of two. It's not a bad rule to start with. But they've also gone in and really dropped the cost of stupid regulations by reducing them. The CDC and the FDA had a very bad reaction first to COVID. CDC said, well, nobody can go invent a test for COVID except us. So for 6 weeks, we waited for them to come up with one.
Right.
Universities weren't allowed to, companies weren't allowed to, hospitals weren't allowed to, only them. In 6 weeks, they came up with one that didn't work. And the FDA somehow trumped them and said, anybody can do it. Now we have many tests.
Right.
And then the CDC said, well, you can have tests, but you have to send it to us for a couple of days and then send it back. And then you can tell somebody after they've infected people for 5 days, you can tell them whether they have COVID.
Right.
Or they've been hiding at home thinking they had it when they didn't. Both of those rules were knocked out.
Right.
The FDA was told to streamline a vaccine to get it done just as safely as ever before. But instead of doing 1, 2, 3, do 1, 2, and 3 at the same time.
Right.
Do all 3 tests in parallel, not in series.
What the same thing? Like an example I have is that halfway through the maybe first month of the COVID thing, someone said, "Why aren't we doing telemedicine? Why is it that every doctor that's licensed in one state can't be licensed in another state without a waiting period and other rules?" And everyone said, "Well, it's an emergency. We'll do telemedicine. Go for it. Well, Medicare will cover it, and also let the doctors go if they're licensed." I mean, my wife's a physician. If they're licensed in one state, they can go another. But now, here's my question on this front. The president's gotten fed up on some of these things and said, I'll just do it with an executive order. But the next guy or gal could roll that back, right? I mean, is that and we had who was here yesterday, John? Was it Roger Severino was talking about the regulations. If you can get them in and get them settled, when they roll them back, you'll at least have a chance to object and fight about it. But what about that where we're not changing the law, we're just having the executive govern? I mean, does it worry you?
It's better than nothing.
Right.
And when enough people have done telemedicine, it's very hard to take it away. Because it's less expensive, it's easier, you make a phone call. It was the doctors who didn't like it because they like you to come in.
Yeah.
And if nobody's allowed to do it, but if everybody's doing it, then the smart doctors will get out and do it better. And they'll figure out how to make a living doing that. So you see more patients, but it costs less money for each of them.
We're talking with Grover Norquist and Americans for Tax Reform. ATR.org, is it ATR.org?
Yep.
So you can see all the stuff. The other through line for this Eagle Countdown, as these 3 nights together, is what should our Eagles, our activists, people that are tuning in, what should they be doing, thinking about, working on? I mean, people know to vote and register to vote, but it's an important election cycle now. Everyone's talking about the nomination to the court. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but we have, how maybe your best maybe compare and contrast to Biden, what's happening. I mean, people, what's at stake here is, when you talk about your issues, I think to myself, boy, Grover's worked his whole career to get somebody doing these things. He really must want 4 more years of this.
Yeah, look, Biden and the Democrats want to undo everything that the president has done. And so it's a huge, huge issue on taxes, on spending, on regulations, on labor union power, on trial lawyer power, all sorts of things. And the judges they want are judges who believe judges should have more power, not
Limited.
a reserved amount of power, but to use that power to say no unconstitutional things, which is what we want a judge to do, but beyond that, not tell us what we have to do.
Right.
I think we're in a position, again, make sure you're registered to vote, make sure your spouse is. Talk to your friends, find out the most important issue to them, and on that issue only, talk to them about what Trump has accomplished. It does no good to talk to somebody and say, well, I agree with you, taxes are very important, we should reduce them, and then decide to ask another 3 questions. Okay?
Right.
Go talk to 3 more people.
Right.
One hook, one fish.
Right.
And talk to somebody, make sure they're supportive and understand it. Don't try and talk them out of their position. There's not time to do that between now in the election. So find the issue they do agree with Trump on and highlight that.
I'm glad you mentioned it because I want to ask you this. I had it in my notes, which I forgot where I put it. You have for many years articulated the cost of the labor unions, the leadership, the sort of corruption of the system on our economy. And now you have children that are in school, or like all of us living with whether it's virtual or halfway. Is it possible that the teachers' unions will be now identified for what a failure they are? I mean, in terms of I tell people the number one thing you talk about, if you want me to concede structural racism, I would say the teachers union and what they've done to urban schools is the best example. If they couldn't design a more racist system, but we've talked about it for decades, and the most voters and others go, well, I want my school to be better, I'm working at it. Is it possible that this school choice conversation can lead to real change there?
Yes, and Exhibit A is North Carolina, where the Republicans have a majority in both houses, Democratic governor, and they said they're going to take some of the COVID money that we've been given and we're going to put it into vouchers, scholarships for kids to go to private school if they wish. Almost every Democrat voted for it, and the governor signed it.
Wow.
Now, the Democrat was against it. They wanted to abolish the program, not augment it.
Right.
The Democrats wanted to abolish the program, not augment it. They're talking to people they view as their voters and getting screamed at in a way that made them punch the teachers' union bosses in the nose and support their friends by voting for the Republican position on school choice. This is a moment where the number of people in Texas signing up to homeschool is up by a factor of 4, so 400%, 4 times more in the last 3-4 months as you go into the end of school. We don't know what the whole numbers are, but when I talk to the people who supply homeschoolers, they say they're sending stuff out the door and just faster than ever. They've never had this many people. How many will do it for years and years? How many do it for 6 months? We don't know. But we had an experiment where almost everybody homeschooled for half a year, and now another half. To then turn around, first of all, you see everything that the school is putting in front of your kid. What?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, that's amazing.
There are no private conversations between
No.
the teachers and the kids anymore.
No.
It's in front of you. So that makes people wonder a little bit about what the schools are doing, the kind of books that they're having the kids read or articles. And you've seen the private schools want to open and the public schools want to shut down. I think you'll see a real shift. There are 3 million kids in charter schools, another million or more trying to get in charter schools. And the Democrat position right now that Biden has taken is close the charter schools.
Close the charter schools. The other thing about, you said earlier about telemedicine, I think it's the same with a voucher in North Carolina. Once you get it for a few 100,000 families, they got friends in all over the country, and they say, I want that, right? I want the, and I think that could be really a important. John, what am I missing here? Anything?
Well, I think millions of families have seen how much waste there is in the public school system, and believe that all of the educators, as they call themselves, are still drawing their fat salaries even when they're not conducting school, and their school buildings are empty and unoccupied, and that can't go on, Grover. I think the people will realize that the system has to be radically changed.
Yes.
I don't want to slip out. We're running out of time, but we're talking with Grover Norquist, ATR.org, Americans for Tax Reform. You have a long history of being a Second Amendment defender. Mm-hmm. And the issue isn't big right now. It hasn't been. I mean, I think most Americans looked at the rioting and said, I'll buy another gun. I mean, gun sales are way up. Mm-hmm. But at least in terms of the heightened attention, maybe we're just in two camps, right? If you believe in the Second Amendment, you're not for the other team. And if you want to see something. But here's the wild card. In 2019 in Virginia, where I live now, more money was spent by one guy, Bloomberg, on Moms for Every Town or whatever to try to demagogue this issue. Is that issue still? I mean, where are we on that issue of Second Amendment?
It's all Bloomberg's money.
Yeah.
And he's misrepresenting it, of course, as gun safety as opposed to gun confiscation and outlawing guns. But he's very clear where he wants to go. That money's out there, and it's big. You do have now 20 million Americans with a concealed carry permit and about 14 million hunters. So everyone tends to think, older people tend to look backwards and say, oh, the gun issue, you mean hunters. No, hunters keep a gun in the basement, and a couple weekends a year they go annoy Bambi's relatives.
Right.
But a gun person is somebody with a concealed carry permit that carries the gun with them in their car, in their purse, on themselves. That person has a personal relationship with the firearm. And that is a much more powerful voting bloc than hunters ever were. Also, it's not rural, it is suburban and rural. And now, thanks to the Black Lives Matter and the riots, urban.
Right. It's you just don't hear much about it, this cycle. Some years it's bigger cycle. All right, Grover.
What you do see are the dramatically higher rates of gun and ammunition sales.
Oh, you can't go to a gun. My buddy was at a gun show 2 weekends ago. And he walked in. He said, "I want to buy this ammo." I said, "Oh, we're out of that. We've been out of that. We opened at 9. It's 11. We're already out of that ammo." I mean, it's incredible how quickly it's going. Okay, Grover Norquist, thank you as always for everything you do, and for your many of our Eagles work with the in many of the states where you have the Wednesday meeting, which Rebecca Gander goes to here in D.C., and then in many states, how many states now have a meeting?
40 have a meeting we're happy with.
Yeah, so there's I'm happy with. That's tough. I ran the meeting in Missouri for a long time. Every couple of months, I get a call from Grover say, "Let's keep building the momentum here." So, but in many of our states, our Eagles are part of that. So, the center right coalition. So, thank you, Grover. We're going to play one of the